There's my photo. I have it here. People are saying that Zelensky is, kind of representative of this wave of populism that's, sweeping Western nations, and that he's like, like a Donald Trump. I would argue that Zelensky's a Trump 2.0 because even Trump went through a process. Even Trump had to go through the primaries. Even Trump had to, despite all the craziness, we know some of Trump's policies were, be it the wall, be it on immigration. He made that clear. He took part in debates. He took part in the process. What the Zelensky campaign was something different, because if you're going to make an analogy with Trump, then it would be like as if Trump's campaign was something where he just stayed off the airwaves, did not engage journalists, and instead, in lieu of his campaign, ran The Apprentice. So to give voters an idea of what he stands for, right? So Zelensky avoided all kind of contact with the media when there were some very tough questions to be asked until the last 4 days. So on Thursday, an interview appeared on RBC.UA, was given to the journalist that won the ping pong tournament at his campaign headquarters. Pretty long interview. It's available online. And then that evening, he finally presented his team. But we still don't know, even though he presented his team, we still don't know who the people will be in those key positions that the president has in his purview, including the head of the SBU, the prosecutor general, the foreign ministry, and the defense ministry. Even though there was a guy called Ivan Arpashin there that Hrytsenko apparently suggested that he take on. But still, we don't know who those people are. And then on Friday, last night, there was finally a debate, but that's like 2 days before elections. And the general feeling that I'm getting, if you're here on the ground, is that the debate was done so late in the game that it just reinforced whatever choices had already been made. It wasn't a game changer either way. And of course, there were some moments that Poroshenko's people jumped upon, namely Zelensky saying or calling of the collaborators in eastern Ukraine rebels, povstanci. So that's making a lot of traction here today. And today's supposed to be a deng tishi. It's supposed to be the quiet day, the day of no campaigning. Yet on social media, we see both parties kind of doing their thing, or both candidates' campaigns doing their thing. So I think that Trump was, as bad as it sounds, he was actually better. He was more part of the process as it was. Zelensky was an unknown, some kind of Schroeder's candidate. You don't know what he stood for. You don't know who his team was going to be until very late in the game. Instead, you had Sluha Narodu, servant of the people, which is like The Apprentice, if you're going to make an analogy with Trump. And that's all people kind of had to go on. And that was a very, if you watched it and seen any of it, it was the last installment of Servant of the People that aired just before the first round was watched by some 6 million people here in Ukraine. No mention of a war with Russia, no mention of Putin. The good guys speak Russian, the bad guys speak Ukrainian. The country's divided, and miraculously, under President Holobrochko, things tend to work themselves out. So, so he's a Trump in the sense that he was an poza systemny. He was outside of the existing political system, but the campaign was something next level. It's a Trump, like I said earlier, 2.0. And it doesn't bode well for for how election campaigns. You know, a lot of people are going to be taking a look at this and saying, "Hey, you know, like, why play by those rules when you can do you can address your followers." You can address your followers directly through tweets or through social media, through video appeals, and talk to them that way, and not engage in any meaningful conversations that'll give voters a chance to see. And then we saw yesterday when he finally did, you know, he was in a confrontational situation, that Zelensky lied. You know, he's not even president yet, and already got caught in a couple of doozies, including saying that he hasn't been to Russia. And then muckrakers here in Ukraine found that he has been in Russia at least once, perhaps more times. So, you know, there's a lot of questions being asked. Had that surfaced earlier in the campaign, then the outcome would have been different. But now his campaign managers are saying, well, that was our strategy. You know, we chose to keep that, you know, keep our candidate out of the limelight, keep him like an unknown entity. So what does that mean for politics? You know, yesterday when I was going to the debates, I thought that the temperature was going to be really high. And I posted, I was, you know, walking with the, and filming the nationalists that were going to the debate, that kind of said, well, we're neither pro-Poroshenko nor anti-Zelensky, but we want to, you know, make our presence known. They, of course, got tickets to the Poroshenko side of the stadium. And I was surprised at the kind of level of calmness that there was. I thought there'd be a lot more hotheads. And of course, there was a lot of buzz in the days leading up to the debate, including by some pro-Zelensky supporters. Dmitry Gordon comes to mind as one of the journalists that made a big stink about or urged Zelensky not to go to the debate because, you know, somebody's going to kill you. So, but it was surprisingly calm. And I think the mood here is, from what I'm gathering, is among the people who think and feel that Zelensky is Sodom, that it would be a kind of a disappointment, that, you know, whatever the case, life will go on. You know, everyone's going to get up on the following day, and, you know, life's going to go on. The big questions that are being bandied about here is what's going to happen next, because the parliamentary elections are supposed to be held on October 27th. And there are some scenarios being talked about that could see them happen as soon as July 27th. And some people are saying that, well, it'll be both in Zelensky's and Poroshenko's interest to hold them sooner rather than later, because Zelensky wants to ride his wave, and so does Poroshenko, because they've been campaigning. So that's one scenario that's going to happen. So a more realistic scenario is probably that, you know, Zelensky will have his inauguration sometime in June. Then July and August, Ukrainians are going to take off to the dacha, take the summer break, and then come back September. And then and then it will be the parliamentary elections. So if this parliament, if Zelensky does not find some common ground with the current parliament very quickly, then it's likely that that scenario will take place, and the next big event that'll happen next week will be on the 25th, when the Rada is supposed to vote on the language law about the Ukrainian as a state language, and it's functioning as a state language. So that'll be the next thing, where what I've seen and heard is there's going to be people that are going to come out to the Rada and demand that the parliamentarians pass that. So that'll be something to watch for in the coming days. And the Zelensky will have to send some pretty clear signals pretty fast about whether or not he's gonna move fast, or he's gonna, let Poroshenko have this kind of lame duck period in the next month and then hold his inauguration. I mean, I've heard there's some wise people that are explaining things. There's one that comes to mind, Oleg Pukachuk, a social psychologist, that explains it this way, that says, look, in 2014, with the Euromaidan, and more particularly with the seizing of Crimea and then the war in the East, you had a lot of people that were previously apolitical all of a sudden becoming political, and that they became politically active, in the last 5 years. And their demands towards the political systems are much like the demands of a 5-year-old who wants it all and wants it now, right? So you have that at play. You also have at play with Poroshenko is that he's been a political player for so long and for so many years that he's managed to piss off a lot of people. He's managed to make a lot of enemies, and people tend to remember that. So you have a very strong anti-Poroshenko element in that as well. And then one thing that is similar to Donald Trump, to return to that, the first, which there's a similarity with the campaign messaging, is just like Trump had that corrupt Hillary component, so too Zelensky had that corrupt Petro theme in his campaign, which is an echo of what worked for Trump, right? And doubtless there are some, shady and questionable dealings that have been done. But when you look at SNC-Lavalin in Canada, with what happened, not with what's happening now, but what happened at the time of when SNC-Lavalin was dealing with Gaddafi, and when you go back to the 2008 financial crisis in the States, and the fact that people got away with financial murder for all intents and purposes, and nobody's been punished for that. The scope of the things we're talking about here are they're really not that big. But for Ukrainians and living in their country, in their bubble, this is, they don't hear or see those things that are happening beyond. Now, there's a very interesting article that appeared in Atlantic Council earlier this week, written by Mary Mitzio, and it talks about how the West may have helped elect Zelensky's campaign, and it's by insisting on corruption and combating corruption. Undoubtedly a problem, but the corruption mantra has become so instilled that all the civil society groups that were dependent, like let's say on funding from the Americans, they were themselves interested in furthering the corruption narrative, because otherwise their funding would get cut off. And then the people in Washington would hear all the complaining about the corruption and all the proof of the corruption, and it was a kind of a self-perpetuating and self-enforcing myth. So, but myth in the sense that it's so pervasive and it's so dominant, such a dominant factor in Ukrainian life, that when in fact it has subsided, you know. The other thing I would say is Ukrainians here, I get the sense they don't know how good they got it too, right? They think that everything, the economy is crap, when in fact it's doing pretty good. They think that poverty is at an all-time high, when in fact it's improved. They've bought into this thing that Ukraine's this you know, failed state, African type banana republic that cannot function, when in fact, you know what, life here is it's not all that bad. There was an interesting statistics earlier this week about $17 billion being spent by Ukrainians on traveling abroad. 8 billion. $8 billion. I correct myself. $8 billion being spent on foreign travel in the last year. I mean, how bad is that? That is also a challenge of the Ukrainian self-perception. And when you keep telling somebody that, you know, you got it bad, pretty soon they start believing it. That being said, there is an appetite for change. There is a populist wave sweeping most democracies in the West. So, you know, it could be par for the course. The one strategically interesting thing that I notice here is that the amount of time the Russian news channels are spending on Ukraine, all their talk shows, and all the time on discussing Ukraine. Apparently yesterday's debates on social media alone was watched by 2 million people. Television sets in Russia were tuned into the debates as well. And this bodes well, I hope, in the long run, because sooner or later the Russians will say, hey, why can't we have some of that? You know, that's pretty cool. Like, give us some of that competition. Give us a stadium. Let's have some of that here in Russia. So, and that is in Ukraine's long-term interest, because when you get Russia that's run by more or less normal people and not Chekists, then you'll see a neighbor that, you know, won't be grabbing your lands and beating you up and taking advantage of all that. So that's the one thing. And if I may, I'll give a plug for the folks at Stop Fake over at the Kyiv Mohila School of Journalism. Tomorrow during Election Day, I'll be there with Marko Suprun of Stop Fake and Marko Rachkevich of the Ukrainian Weekly. And we're going to be going on social media occasionally to monitoring what's coming out in the news and spotting any fakes that come out there and dissecting them.